Welcome to the Child Care Director's Chair, the podcast for bold educators who are ready to lead, grow, and shake things up in early childhood education. Whether you're a teacher eyeing that lead role, a lead stepping into leadership, or a center owner dreaming big, this is your space to grow with purpose and leave your mark. Hosted by heart-centered leadership coach Erica Sacosio, each episode brings you real talk, actionable tools, and a contagious laugh or two, all designed to help you step into your next level with confidence. So pour your coffee, pop in those earbuds, and take your seat, because your leadership journey starts right now in the Child Care Director's Chair.
Hey guys, it's Erica with the Child Care Director's Chair podcast. So excited you are here today. We have a wonderful episode for you. And I want to ask you something. If children could behave better just by being told to, they probably already would. Challenging behavior isn't a discipline issue, it's a developmental signal. And today we're talking about how educators can stop reacting and start guiding children towards success. We are joined with Yolanda Richey, a passionate early educator. She is a professional with over 20 years of experience. She has served just about every role. She helps folks on all different levels with training. She has a master's degree in early childhood special education and is a level 2 infant mental health consultant.
You got it.
She's also a certified CDA program specialist, which is where I met her. So shout out to Calvin and the board over at the CDA council. And she is a adjunct professor in early childhood education. You know, I feel like so many teachers have been overwhelmed by behavior challenges in the classrooms, the meltdowns, defiance, those big emotions, or children who just can't seem to settle down. And if that's you who's listening, this episode is for you. So, we're going to shift that conversation from what's wrong with this child to what does this child need from me? So, exactly. Yolanda, let's turn it over to you because you are the specialist. Let's talk about it. So,
thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about behavior is the biggest challenge, right? So a teacher says, they're really struggling with behaviors. We often hear behavior communication. What does that look like in the classroom?
Right. So, first of all, thank you. Thank you again for that wonderful introduction. And, shout out to all the teachers who are trying their very best to service young children, right? And, behavior, like you just said, it really is communication. So it often is going to look like a child that may not be following your directions or a child that is trying to be defiant. But really what we need to be asking ourselves is what skills does this child need to develop so that they are able to be successful? And if we can look at it with that lens on, then we'll start to see behavior as another area of development, just like we do any other area, right? If a child can't, tie their shoes, we take time and we teach them what to do. If a child is learning anything academically, we praise them as they learn those ABCs and 1, 2, 3s. But a lot of times when it comes to behavior, we get caught up in why aren't they listening to me? And instead of worrying about why aren't they listening, we need to be asking ourselves, what skills do they need?
Oh God, we could talk about this probably for hours, right? So let's talk about maybe what does that look like in a classroom? So you're a teacher, there's a kid running around, you've talked to 100 times. What would you recommend to that teacher?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think, you have to go back to the foundation, right? And I've been thinking a lot about the conference that's coming up and the workshop we're doing there. And a lot of times, first of all, if we're flying on an airplane, right, and we're going through that little spill that they do in the beginning and they tell us, if there's some turbulence, what do we need to do, right? We need to take care of ourselves first, right? So a lot of times in the classroom, what I like to start with teachers is check in on yourself first. What does this behavior ignite in you? You know what I mean? Is there some animosity there? Do you feel like you're losing control? Maybe you have a supervisor that you're not as close to as you need to be. And, you're worried you're going to get in trouble if they can hear the child screaming. So first check in with yourself, right? And ask yourself, what do I need in order to be able to better manage this situation? All right. And a lot of times what you'll find is the next step. And the next thing you need is, what does my relationship with that child look like, right? So the foundation of any behavior starts with a good positive relationship between the child and the teacher. And I know some teachers are probably listening and saying, well, how do you develop a relationship with a child that, is not listening to you? And that's where the practices are going to come in, right? What are the things that you know about this child? What do they like? What do they not like? What jobs can you give them in the classroom to help them, be more of the community in the class? Like, how can you get to know them so that you can start to look at this behavior as something that you want to develop rather than something that needs to be quote unquote fixed, right? So developing that relationship with the child is often going to help to govern the behaviors. And in the workshop that we're doing at the conference that you don't want to miss, right? You want to come to this workshop and find out what are those things that we can do to develop that relationship, and then how is that going to impact the behavior? So hopefully I answered some of your questions.
Yeah, for sure. What would you say one of the most common misconception that educators have about children who display challenging behaviors?
I think one of them is a lot of times that the children are doing it on purpose, that they are trying to get under your skin, right? That they're trying to get, on your nerves. Right? That they could listen if they wanted to. But as we think about young children, and especially those who have behavioral concerns, if we think about the neuroscience behind brain development and all of that, what we know is that really young children have to develop those pathways that help them learn how to develop this behavior. And just like any other skill they have to develop, some of them have more problems getting there than others, right? They may need smaller steps to get there. They may need some redirection. They may need some clear boundaries, So I think a lot of the misconception is that children don't want to behave. And I don't think that is it at all. I think they need to develop the skills that are going to help them learn how to behave and what is acceptable and what's not acceptable.
And so my next question is, and you might have already answered this, but you can add on to it. What's the difference between managing a behavior and guiding a behavior?
Yeah, managing a behavior basically is just that, right? You're trying to remain in control of the situation. You want the child to do what you do or do what you say and right away, right? Like you're trying to just make sure that everything goes the way you've had planned. Guiding a behavior is more so you're helping that child to understand that they want to follow this direction and why it's important to follow the directions, right? You're helping them gain control of their own emotions. You're helping them, understand what friendship skills look like and what, proper etiquette, if you want to say it in that way. What does that look like, right? So you're really, when you're guiding the behavior, you're giving the child the tools they need so that they can be successful.
Yeah, I like too, when I think about this, managing behavior, I think I totally agree with you, is this is what I want done. This is how I want it done. This is when I want it done. Where guiding behavior, I think of it more of almost like those choices of here's what's happening. Here are the things we can do about it. We can be upset, we can scream, or we can be upset and we can talk about it, or we can be, giving the child some guidance. I think it's right in the word guiding, how they can get through that behavior.
Exactly.
I can see you're upset, helping name it for them. I can see you're upset, how can I help you? Or what do you need from me? Right. So I think that those things need to be intentional when we're responding to children. I think taking a breath too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Taking a breath.
Yeah, definitely.
Take a beat, girl. Take a
definitely.
beat. I'm
Definitely.
that kid is 3 years old. Breathe. You are in control. They are not.
And what I like to tell teachers is, think about a time when you weren't understood and someone is just trying to act like you should understand or, why don't you understand, right? And how much more frustrated you become because you're just trying to be understood. And you have the language, you have the skills. But when we're talking about a 3 or 4-year-old, maybe even a 2-year-old, they don't have the language, a lot of them. They don't even understand what's going on inside of them and why they're feeling aggravated, right? We don't even always know the antecedent that came behind the behavior. Maybe the morning was just really rough at home.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have their favorite cereal and they had to just settle for what was available. And now they get to the classroom and someone snatches their toys and they just lose it. You know what I mean? And it's just all of these things that are going on, So I think sometimes when we try and think from that child's perspective that they need the language and the choices that help them to come to the conclusion that would be acceptable for all. I think that helps us a lot when we talk about guiding
Yeah,
behaviors.
and this makes me think about why language development and talking to children as young as infants
For
is so
sure.
important because, you have to think about the first 2 years of this child's life.
Yeah.
They learned and we reinforced, if I cry, I get fed. If I have a tantrum, somebody comes, right? I cry, somebody comes. So the
Yeah.
first 2 years of life, we as adults have reinforced that, right? This is how I get my needs met. And so then something happens when they turn like this 3 and 4 year old that they're not supposed to think that way, but we've reinforced that. So
Right,
that
right.
language development, like when they're young, especially when they're toddlers, I can see you having a tantrum. I
Yeah.
can see your feeling so big now. We don't want to wait till they're 3 and 4 to now start to talk about this is what
Exactly.
you're experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. And, just taking that time, like you said, when we think about what we have to do to help young children develop, a lot of times we miss those opportunities to embed lessons on behavior or, what was called emotional literacy, right? Giving them all the words that they need to properly express their emotions. There are so many games we can play and, books we can read that help children understand more about how they feel and how to express this. And yeah, I think it needs to be part of the curriculum, not just addressed when there's a problem, right? Like a lot of times it's just addressed when there's a problem. And now this child becomes a quote unquote problem child when really they didn't have the tools. And I hate to keep going back to that word, but they didn't have the tools that they needed to develop the skills.
Yeah. And the other thing I think we should probably touch upon too is like how educators maintain structure and expectations without relying on punitive like punishment or taking things
For
away.
sure.
Or you don't get this or that, What would you say to folks? Because I've seen this.
Yeah.
in real
I always
life.
tell people, I think the environment is your co-teacher, right? So the way you set up your environment has so much to do with how the behaviors are going to go in your classroom, right? So thinking about like all of those things. Do I have too many children playing over here in this center? And, do I have enough materials for 2 or 3 children to share over here? Have I explained to them clearly what is allowed in this area? Or do I just address it when it becomes an issue, right? Do I have my quiet area separated from my not so quiet area? Are things accessible to children that are going to cut back on their frustration? Like, is art near the sink? Little things like that really kind of all work together, but really little by little, a little becomes a lot in both ways, right? A little bit of frustration becomes a lot of frustration, but a lot of organization becomes a lot of happy classroom experiences, So just thinking about, yes, the environment and making sure that it's set up in a way that's going to allow for maximum success is a big part of behavior. And I know teachers sometimes get tired of labeling and relabeling shelves, but these things help children feel like they're in control, right? If they know where to put things back or if they know where to find materials, that's going to cut back on frustration. So taking time to make sure that your classroom environment is well organized is going to be a big part of helping children navigate the environment successfully.
Yeah. Let's tell the truth here, Yolanda. It isn't just the children that it reduces stress.
Oh, yeah.
Frustration, right? How many times do you want to keep taking the blocks out of the dramatic play? Putting them
Right.
back on the block.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it gives hope, right? There's more of them than there is of us. So
Yeah.
the more little hands. And I have these 2 little boys at our preschool location who absolutely do the block shelf so beautifully. It looks like it's displayed in Lakeshore. I mean, they match them up perfectly in rows, by size, by shape.
Right.
So they can do it. They actually are very proud of it. And sometimes they'll say to their friends, all right, it's cleaned up for the night.
That's
Don't
right.
touch them again.
And that whole part about them feeling proud, right?
Yeah.
That in itself helps to increase the behaviors that we want to see, right? Children who don't feel proud of who they are normally the ones that we have problematic behaviors coming from. So setting them up in a way where they have lots to feel proud about is another great tool for managing behaviors in a positive way.
Yeah. And, let's also talk about the role of the adult, right? Because the adult's emotion and their ability to regulate also impacts the child's ability to regulate, right? If you're stressed out, or you're huffing and puffing, or your body language is closed or tensed, or
Yeah.
you had a bad day because you didn't have your favorite cereal.
Right.
Right. So you guys, sometimes you have to like take a look in the mirror and say, okay, what kind of vibe am I putting out? What energy
Yeah.
am I putting out? Because kids are
Yeah.
really good at receiving that. Do you have any thoughts or ideas or anything you want to add around how adults can maybe help with emotional regulation for both the children and themselves?
Right. And you hit on some of that. We don't give enough credit to the power of just taking a deep breath, right? So, first of all, make sure you're on time for work, right? So that you have time to breathe. Because if you come in and you already start your day rushing and trying to, gather the children and get things going, you're not doing yourself any favors. So really just making sure that you're intentional with your own personal planning, right? Are you leaving yourself enough time to get to work so that you have a moment to breathe? Or if you need to fill the glue bottles, you can do that, right? Because you've gotten there a little bit early so that you can do that. Really just taking some time to reflect at the end of the day or at nap time in the middle of the day, what worked well, what didn't work so well. And really giving yourself credit for the things that are going well, right? Telling yourself, hey, I'm doing a great job here. Just being grateful for who you are, right? And then seeking out that mentor, someone that you can trust, with confidentiality, but just saying to, having someone to say, hey, I'm having a really rough day today. Can we talk about it a little bit? Can you give me some tips? And like I said, maintaining that confidentiality, but just having that team that you can kind of fall back on, that helps a lot as well. But I think when you think about just your own personal well-being, just making sure that you've really set yourself up for success. I think sometimes that educators feel like, well, I'm not going to go to that training because I'm not required to go, or I'm not going to show up for work 10 minutes early because I'm not getting paid for that, right? And when it comes to being an intentional early professional, it's so much more than that. You have to do the things that are going to really benefit you in the long run. If going to that training is something you need to do, even if you have all of your hours, go to the training. Because you never know. You might learn something that can really be helpful, right? If getting to work 10 or 15 minutes early, even though you're not on the clock, is going to give you a time to just breathe a little bit, why not get there early and just, be ready for whatever the day may bring? So just really being reflective and intentional about being a professional, I think helps a whole lot.
Yeah. Thank you. That's great. That's great advice. What are some like mistakes that educators might often make with good intentions when it comes to responding to challenging behavior?
Yeah. I think sometimes, we all are human, losing it, right? So maybe screaming at a child, right? But knowing that you can go back just like you should and say, you know what? I was really upset when you did such and such. I shouldn't have screamed at you, and I'm really sorry. Let's think about how we're going to handle this next time. Number one, it shows accountability to children, right? It shows that you're human and you make mistakes and you can apologize too. So it helps to, again, build that trusting relationship. The other thing is thinking that you're supposed to know everything and you can't reach out for help. Right? So if you ask someone for help or if you have a problematic situation, then you are a weak teacher or you're not, where you need to be. Where really you just might need some new tools in your toolbox. You just might need some new skills. Thinking that you have to know it all is another mistake that I see teachers make. And really just not being honest about a situation. Like some situations are really hard to handle, and it's okay to say that. But it's not okay to just say that and be willing to do nothing. So what are we going to do to handle this situation instead of saying like, oh no, I got it. It's going to be okay. Maybe you need some additional guidance. Maybe you need a mentor. Maybe you need a coach. But what will you need so that you can do your job successfully? Because ultimately, I don't think there's a director out there that wants to lose staff members or wants their teachers to be frustrated, right? But I do think that there's an expectation that you function in a way that's going to be beneficial for the program, beneficial for the children, and ultimately beneficial for yourself. So, accepting that help when you know you need the help is something I think that educators don't always put themselves up to. So that's why I think coming to conferences and talking with others and, seeing that, hey, I'm not the only one that's having this issue can be really helpful.
Yeah. I talked to lots of early childhood leaders. And, one of the things that you said that I kind of laughed about because I always know the high level leaders and it's folks who go to conferences, not because they need hours. A lot of times it's they want the content. They want the skills.
Right.
I can't even tell you how many conferences I've been to. I don't even grab the certificate because I'm investing in myself. And really it's, making that investment in yourself, having those tools. Once you have those tools, those belong to you. The other thing that I don't want to use the word infuriate, but I will. Infuriates me is when staff go to sessions and then don't implement what they learned. Do not put those handouts in a folder, in a file that you're never going to touch again.
Yeah.
Because this is a practice. This is a profession and a practice. And you need to try the tools, right? What works for one kid doesn't work necessarily for the next, right? So it's what tools do you have? What ones can you tweak, right? A carpenter has 1,000 different types of saws and screwdrivers and drills, right? And they have different heads, and you use different tools for different things. So
I love that. That's true. And just even having that accountability partner, right? When you come back from this conference, what did you learn? What goals are you going to implement? And who's going to make sure that you're doing that, right? Who's going to help you make sure that that conference that you said was so great, what are you doing to implement what you learned? So that's important.
That's a big shout out to my education coordinators out there, whoever's responsible for those professional development plans for your team. Don't just send them. When they come back, what's the accountability for them, but also what's the follow-up too, right?
Exactly.
Because that's our job as a leader, is to follow up with our team. What went well, what are we going to be able to see in the classrooms?
Right.
So as we start to wrap up, let me ask you, if you could shift one belief that educators have about child behavior, what would it be? Maybe finish this sentence. Children don't need us to blank. They need us to blank.
Right. Wow. I would say children don't need us to control. They need us to care. Right. And if we care, then we're going to understand that that's going to require communication. And that's what behavior is, right? Behavior is trying to figure out what are they communicating. So, I think that's what they need. We call this child care, but sometimes we need to back up and really think about what that care part of it means, right? And there's so much involved in that. And, to care for someone means that when they're at their lowest, when they're, falling to pieces, that you're going to be the one that's going to be there and say, I understand that this is really hard for you, but we're going to work through this together, right? That's really what caring is. So when children are having those tantrums and when children are having those behaviors, just slow down enough and ask yourself, do I really care for this child? And when you get to that point, now you're putting yourself in a position where you're removing your own frustration, you're calming your own self down, and you can help to co-regulate the situation with the child. So,
Yeah. So, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If this conversation doesn't end here, it doesn't end here today. If today's episode reminded you that behavior guidance is about connection, not control, then I invite you to join us at the Early Education Empowerment Conference. This is where educators come together to learn real, practical strategies, build confidence in managing behavior, and reconnect with their purpose in this work. Listen, like she said earlier, you don't have to figure this out alone. I'm like, I can't talk today. This is my 5th episode today, and I have another one at 3. So you don't have to do it alone, guys. Join the conversation, join our community, join us at the Early Education Empowerment Conference. As always, thank you so much for your time, Yolanda, and your wisdom. And I cannot wait to see you in May in Rhode Island.
Yes, I cannot wait to be there. Thank you, guys. Come to the conference and let's get this done together.
Have a great day. That's the cool thing about this is we are.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Child Care Director's Chair, where we believe leaders aren't born, they're grown. If something sparked for you today, share it, shout it out, or pass it along to the next bold changemaker in childcare. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and stay connected with Erica Sacosio for more real talk leadership tools and a whole lot of inspiration. Until next time, lead with heart, grow with fire, and always remember, the chair is yours. Now own it.